My fiancée and her family publicly humiliated me for being poor, so I cancelled the wedding and bought the restaurant they thought they owned. I'm a 29-year-old guy who grew up learning to stay invisible, to stay humble, to stay grateful for whatever scraps of respect I was given, because in my world, money decided who mattered and who didn't. I learned early that my beat-up sedan, my modest apartment, and my long hours at a mid-level job were things people like her family quietly judged, even before they ever spoke to me. When I met my fiancée through mutual friends, her laugh felt genuine, warm, almost disarming, and for the first time, I believed I wasn't just the poor guy trying to survive, but someone worthy of love. She told me, "You feel real, like you're not trying to impress anyone," and that sentence stayed with me like a promise I desperately wanted to believe. The first time I met her parents, her mother's eyes flicked over my shoes, lingering just a second too long, like she was mentally calculating their price. Her father glanced at my car and let out a small breathy laugh, muttering, "Practical choice," as if practicality was a polite way to say embarrassing. I told myself they were just protective, just cautious, just conditioned by their lifestyle. Still, when her aunt asked, "So what exactly do you do for a living?" the way she dragged out the word exactly made my stomach tighten. At dinners, they spoke about investments, private schools, luxury holidays, and trusts, while I stirred my drink slowly, pretending not to notice the way silence followed my answers. "He's simple," my fiancée would say with a soft smile, squeezing my arm, and I wasn't sure if it was affection or quiet apology. The chandelier above us shimmered, throwing gold reflections across their polished table, but all I could feel was the chill crawling up my spine. I kept telling myself love was stronger than discomfort, that once they saw my character, my loyalty, my heart, everything would change, that respect would come in time. I repeated it like a prayer every time my fiancé avoided my eyes when they made another comment about background or standards. Still, somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice whispered that I was stepping into a world that already decided I didn't belong, and I feared it was only the beginning. I'm a 29-year-old guy who slowly realized our engagement wasn't about love anymore, it was about presentation, image, and how well I fit into a story they wanted to sell to their elite circle. The night she showed me her mother's engagement vision board, my chest tightened as I saw mood boards full of champagne towers, gold-plated decor, and guest lists I didn't recognize. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime moment," she said excitedly, but her eyes held a pressure I'd never seen before. When I asked where I fit into all of it, she just laughed softly and said, "You'll be there, of course," like I was just an accessory to the aesthetic. At every dinner, her parents spoke as if the wedding was a corporate launch. "We can't have anything that looks cheap," her mother insisted while scanning me like a flawed design element. Her father casually added, "Our guests expect a certain caliber," and I felt the word caliber slicing quietly through my confidence. I tried joking it off, saying, "I guess I'll just try not to embarrass anyone," hoping it would lighten the mood, but no one laughed. The clink of their expensive cutlery echoed like a reminder that I was out of place. My fiancée started correcting the way I dressed, the way I spoke, even the way I laughed. "Maybe we're something more refined," she whispered before one gathering, tugging at my collar with anxious fingers. I felt my cheeks burn as she adjusted me in front of her friends, like I was unfinished. When I finally said, "It feels like you're ashamed of me," she sighed and replied, "Don't make this dramatic, I'm just trying to help you blend in." The air at her family's events felt heavy with perfume, money, and quiet judgment, and every step I took on their marble floors sounded too loud, too real, too poor. I kept swallowing the shame, convincing myself this was temporary, that she still loved me beneath all this polished expectation. But as I watched her laugh with her parents while they planned a future that barely included me, a cold realization began spreading silently through my chest, and something inside me started to ache with doubt. I'm a 29-year-old guy who walked into that family dinner believing I could still earn their respect. The long polished table glowed under warm amber lights, but my chest felt tight and fragile. Her relatives sat dressed in tailored perfection, their eyes flickering over me like silent appraisals. Her father raised his glass and said, "Let's talk about the future our daughter deserves." I smiled stiffly, already sensing the direction his words were headed. "Stability is everything," he continued, "and ambition should match the standard of this family." My fiancée avoided my gaze, tracing the rim of her glass instead. Her mother leaned forward and murmured, "We just want her safe, not struggling." I tried to steady my voice and said, "I work hard, and I care deeply for her." Her aunt chuckled softly and replied, "Hard work doesn't always mean success, unfortunately." The air smelled of expensive wine and sharp judgment, making each breath heavier. Inside, my thoughts spiraled into memories of every time I was told I wasn't enough. My fiancée finally spoke. "They just worry too much, baby, don't take it personally." But her hands slipped away from mine as if agreeing with them silently. I watched her smile at their approval, and something cracked deep in my chest. Her father's eyes returned to me and he smirked. "Love is wonderful, but money maintains lifestyles." A faint ripple of uncomfortable laughter followed his words through the room. I swallowed my shame and forced a nod to keep the peace. Each whispered comment felt like another reminder that I didn't belong here. My fiancé leaned close and whispered, "Just endure this, okay, for us." I nodded, though my heart trembled with quiet humiliation and confusion. As I looked around their flawless dining hall, I realized their verdict had already been decided. And with every polite smile they offered, the distance between us grew colder. Somewhere between their whispers and her silence, I felt respect slipping away completely. I'm a 29-year-old guy who kept forcing a smile every time they reminded me, subtly and sometimes brutally, that I didn't belong in their carefully curated world. After that dinner, her mother pulled me aside near the hallway where the smell of expensive candles mixed with cold marble, and murmured, "You seem sweet, but sweetness doesn't pay for the life our daughter deserves." My throat tightened as I nodded, pretending I understood her concern when all I felt was quiet humiliation burning behind my ribs. I could hear their soft laughter echoing from the dining room, and it felt like every sound was aimed directly at me. Later that night, her father cornered me near the balcony, the city lights glowing like distant stars behind him. "Listen," he said calmly, almost kindly, "you seem like a nice enough boy, but this family operates on standards. You can't expect to rise just because you're marrying into it." I tried to respond, my voice low and strained. "I'm not asking to rise, I just want to love her and build something real." He scoffed gently and replied, "Love doesn't build empires, son. Resources do." When I found my fiancée, she was laughing with her cousins, her face soft and familiar, and for a moment I almost forgot the weight in my chest. I pulled her aside and whispered, "It feels like your family already decided I'm not enough." She sighed, her eyes briefly clouded, and said, "You're being too sensitive, they just want the best for me." Those words stung more than any insult they had thrown my way, because it felt like she was choosing comfort over defending me. I watched as she returned to them, her hands slipping effortlessly into her mother's, her smile brighter than it had been with me all evening. The music hummed softly in the background, crystal glasses clinked, and the air felt thick with quiet judgment and unspoken rejection. I stood there alone, trying to convince myself this was just temporary, that love would win, that dignity could survive this slow erosion. But the way they looked at me, the way she stopped reaching for me, made an unsettling truth emerge, and I felt it wrapping tightly around my heart. I'm a 29-year-old guy who thought I'd already endured the worst of their judgment, until the night they decided to turn my humiliation into casual entertainment. It was another formal dinner, another performance of wealth and perfection, except this time their cruelty wasn't whispered in corners, it was staged in front of everyone. The dining hall glowed with crystal chandeliers and polished silver, but all I could feel was the heavy pressure of eyes waiting for something to laugh at. Her father stood and clinked his glass, smiling like a proud host. "Let's raise a toast to our daughter," he announced, then his gaze slid directly to me. "And to the courageous man who chose to love her despite his modest circumstances." A wave of uncomfortable laughter rippled through the room. I felt my hands go cold as my heart hammered painfully against my ribs. "And let's hope," her mother added sweetly, "that love will somehow replace the lifestyle he clearly can't provide." The words hung in the air like poison wrapped in silk. Someone muttered, "She sacrificed a lot choosing him," and another voice replied, "At least he's trying." Trying. Like I was an experiment they didn't believe in. I turned to my fiancée, silently pleading for support, for anything. She gave a nervous laugh and whispered, "Please don't cause a scene." That single sentence felt like a blade pressed gently into my chest. I forced a weak smile, but inside, something shattered quietly, piece by piece. Her cousin leaned over and said, "So what's it like living on a budget?" then laughed into his drink. The smell of expensive wine and cologne filled my lungs, making me dizzy, almost detached from my own body. I nodded, pretending none of this mattered, while every word carved deeper into my pride. Standing there, surrounded by their soft laughter and polished cruelty, I realized they weren't just humiliating me, they were enjoying it. And as my fiancée returned their smiles instead of defending me, I felt a slow, unstoppable fracture forming between who I was and who they wanted me to be, and I sensed this humiliation was only assembling something far more devastating ahead. I'm a 29-year-old guy who sat in my car outside their mansion that night, staring at the empty road ahead, feeling the echo of their laughter still bruising my ears. My hands trembled against the steering wheel, not just from anger, but from a quiet, calculated realization that had been growing for months beneath my silence. They thought I was powerless, desperate, dependent, but what they never bothered to ask was how I managed to keep my life so stable without their approval. The truth was, I learned long ago to move quietly, to build without announcing it, to let success bloom where no one cared to look. I remembered the investor meetings I never spoke about, the side ventures I poured sleepless nights into, the partnerships I kept off social media, far from their curated world. While they were mocking my modest circumstances, I had been finalizing negotiations with my mentor's firm, one that specialized in rescuing hospitality businesses drowning in debt. And buried in those files, hidden beneath shiny brand names and polished menus, was their precious restaurant, bleeding money, silently struggling, surviving on illusion instead of profit. I just signed the preliminary stake agreement, my mentor had told me earlier that week over the phone. This place has potential, but the owners are arrogant and reckless. They don't even know they're on the verge of losing it. I laughed weakly then, never imagining it was their empire he was talking about. That realization crashed into me now like cold water, sharp and sobering, shifting something fundamental inside my chest. When my phone buzzed, it was my fiancée. "You left early," she said softly, almost accusing. "I didn't feel welcome," I replied, my voice calm, unsettling even to myself. "You're overthinking, they were just joking," she brushed off, her tone reflecting their contempt more than my pain. "Jokes stop being jokes when they hurt," I murmured before ending the call. As I sat there watching the distant glow of their estate lights, something dangerous and determined settled over me. They believed I was beneath them, disposable, weak, but they had no idea how close they were to losing control of the very place they boasted about. And for the first time since all this began, I didn't feel humiliated. I felt aware, alert, and quietly powerful. Still, beneath that rising clarity, my heart ached with betrayal, and the question lingered suffocatingly in my mind: did the woman I loved even know who I truly was anymore? I'm a 29-year-old guy who walked into the next wedding planning meeting already carrying a secret they would never see coming, yet the weight of my fiancée's growing coldness still crushed my chest. The venue smelled of fresh lilies and polished marble, but the space felt more like a boardroom than a place where love was meant to be celebrated. Her mother spread glossy brochures across the table and said, "We'll keep the guest list exclusive, of course, no unnecessary additions," and her eyes flickered briefly in my direction as if I was one of those additions. My fiancée barely looked at me as she scrolled through her phone, whispering numbers to her mother about catering costs and designer chairs. "Does any of this even feel like us anymore?" I asked quietly. She sighed without lifting her gaze and replied, "This is what a real wedding looks like, try to understand." The word real echoed painfully, like my version of life wasn't valid enough to be included. Her father leaned back in his chair and said, "We're investing heavily in this event. It sets expectations for the future." I swallowed and responded carefully, "A wedding shouldn't feel like a financial strategy." He chuckled, unfazed. "Everything in life is strategy, especially marriage." My fiancée nodded subtly, aligning with him without even realizing how deeply it wounded me. The tension wrapped tightly around my ribs as they dismissed every suggestion I made, from simple venues to more personal details. "That's not our style," her mother repeated, again and again, and each time it felt like she was saying, "You're not our style." I glanced at my fiancée, waiting for her to soften, to defend us, to defend me, but she only smiled at her parents, absorbing their approval like oxygen. The scent of her perfume drifted toward me, familiar and once comforting, now strangely distant. I felt like a guest at my own wedding, watching it be shaped into a spectacle I'd barely recognized. And as I sat there silently, aware of the secret negotiations unfolding behind the scenes of their precious restaurant, I realized the celebration they were planning wasn't about union at all, it was about control. But what hurt the most wasn't their arrogance, it was the way my fiancée slowly stopped seeing my pain, and I wondered, with a heavy heart sinking further into doubt, how much more of myself I was going to lose before something finally broke. I'm a 29-year-old guy who didn't realize how fragile I'd become until the night I finally broke alone in my apartment, surrounded by silence and the echo of everything I'd swallowed. The hum of the refrigerator and the faint glow of my city window felt mocking, like the world kept spinning while I slowly came undone. I sat on the edge of my couch, staring at my phone, replaying every moment she chose them over me, every time her laugh softened for their approval but hardened toward my pain. "What's wrong with me?" I whispered, my voice cracking under the weight of unanswered questions in quiet shame. I remembered her words, "Don't make this dramatic," and they settled in my chest like a quiet condemnation. I pulled at my collar, struggling to breathe, as if every insult they had thrown was tightening around my neck silently, deliberately. My phone buzzed again. "We need to talk about the guest list," she typed, "nothing about the way I walked out, nothing about the way I looked when they humiliated me. Do you even care how your family treats me?" I finally sent. A pause followed, one that felt endless. "They're just trying to protect me," was the only reply. That was it. Right there, I felt the floor drop beneath me. I wasn't her partner anymore, I was a liability she was defending them from. My chest ached, my hands shook, and I slid down onto the cold floor, pressing my forehead against my knees, breathing like someone who lost a war no one else saw. The scent of dust and old fabric filled the air, grounding me in the reality I tried so hard to ignore. I questioned everything, my worth, my loyalty, my sanity. Was love supposed to feel like erosion? Was silence my new role? I stared at the ceiling, listening to the distant sirens outside, wondering how I let myself become so small in the name of devotion. In that moment, I didn't feel powerful, strategic, or hopeful. I felt defeated, stripped, invisible. And as my phone lit up once more with her impatient reminder about venue deadlines, I realized I'd hit the lowest point I could possibly imagine, but deep down, something restless and unresolved began to stir, even as my heart trembled in exhaustion, waiting for the next emotional blow to land. I'm a 29-year-old guy who woke up the morning after that breakdown with a strange, unfamiliar quiet inside me, like the emotional storm had finally burned itself out and left something colder, clearer behind. The sunlight spilling through my curtains felt harsh against my tired eyes, but it also felt like a silent reminder that I'd been suffocating in their shadow far too long. I sat at the edge of my bed, listening to the distant traffic hum and the slow beat of my own heart, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel apologetic for existing. My phone buzzed again. "We finalized the flower arrangements," she texted. "You need to approve." I stared at the screen, thumbs hovering, and finally replied, "We need to talk about us, not centerpieces." A moment passed. Then, "You're making this harder than it needs to be." That sentence settled something inside me. I walked into my bathroom, splashed cold water onto my face, and studied my reflection, the tired eyes, the worn expression, the man who had been shrinking to fit expectations that were never meant for him. "You deserve respect," I whispered, barely recognizing the certainty in my own voice. The words felt fragile, but real. Later that afternoon, I made the call I'd been postponing for weeks. "I'm ready," I told my legal advisor quietly. "Proceed with caution, but move forward." He paused, then replied, "Once this unfolds, there's no turning back." "I know," I said, feeling my pulse steady instead of racing. When my fiancée finally called, her voice carried frustration instead of concern. "Why are you pulling away?" she demanded. "I'm not pulling away," I answered, calm but firm. "I'm waking up." She scoffed nervously. "You're overreacting again." "No," I breathed, staring out at the city skyline, "I'm finally reacting enough." The air around me felt sharper, more defined, as if the world had shifted into focus. I could still feel the hurt, the betrayal, the echo of laughter from their table, but now it no longer controlled my breath. Something measured and deliberate had taken its place. And as I stared at the documents waiting on my desk, the signatures inching closer to something that could change everything, I couldn't help but wonder, how would they react when they realized the man they broke was no longer willing to stay broken? I'm a 29-year-old guy who walked into their precious restaurant for what they thought was another ordinary brunch, unaware that the ground beneath their arrogance was about to shift. The air smelled of fresh espresso and polished marble, and waiters moved with rehearsed grace as her parents greeted their elite guests like royalty overseeing a kingdom. Her father stood near the entrance, proudly gesturing around and saying, "This place is our legacy, as if the word ownership was carved into the very walls. I took my seat quietly, my heart steady in a way it had never been before, watching them bask in compliments and admiration. My fiancée barely acknowledged my presence, whispering something to her mother while avoiding my eyes completely. When a sharply dressed man approached our table, her father beamed. "This is Mr. Hottie," he announced. "He's just here to discuss some minor developmental partnerships." The man glanced at me briefly and smiled with recognition. "Actually," he said calmly, placing a leather folder on the table, "I'm here to formalize the change in ownership structure." Her mother frowned. "Change in what?" He opened the folder slowly, the soft rustling of papers cutting through the music and low chatter like a knife through silk. "As of this morning," he continued, "majority stake legally belongs to Mr. Rahman." Silence swallowed the air. Their heads turned toward me in unison, disbelief stretching across their faces. "This has to be a mistake," her father snapped, but his confidence already trembled. I met his gaze evenly. "It's not a mistake," I replied, my voice measured but unwavering. "Your financial records showed deeper instability than you realized, and my firm has been negotiating quietly for months." "What firm?" her mother whispered. "The one you never thought I could afford," I answered, watching the color drain from their expressions. My fiancée stared at me like she was seeing a stranger, lips parted, confusion and panic tangling in her eyes. "You did this behind our backs," she breathed. "I did this while you laughed with them," I said softly, not angry, just honest. The atmosphere shifted, heavy, electric, brittle with reality crashing through illusion. Guests leaned closer, murmurs rippling through the dining hall, and the proud aura that once filled the space now trembled at my feet. But as I watched their carefully crafted superiority fracture, a strange question pulsed beneath my quiet victory: how far would they go when they realized their control was truly gone? I'm a 29-year-old guy who finally felt the room shift beneath them, but instead of fear, I felt a slow, burning release rising through my chest. Her father stood frozen, his hands gripping the edge of the table like he could physically hold on to the power he was losing. "You think this makes you superior?" he snapped, voice cracking beneath strained pride. I met his glare calmly and said, "No, it just makes me honest about what you've always pretended you owned." My fiancée's face twisted between shock and betrayal. "You humiliated my family," she whispered, her voice shaky with disbelief. "You humiliated me long before today," I replied quietly, the truth settling heavy between us. Around us, the soft murmurs of guests blended with the clinking of glasses, each sound echoing through the tense silence like a quiet drumbeat of judgment shifting direction. Her mother stepped forward, lowering her voice as if we were still in private. "You could have warned us," she hissed. "You never warned me before tearing down my dignity," I answered, my words steady but raw. The manager moved anxiously toward me. "Sir, should we escort them to your office?" I glanced at her parents and said, "No, let them stay where everyone can see what entitlement looks like." Her father scoffed bitterly. "You're enjoying this." "I'm experiencing honesty for the first time in months," I said, my throat tightening as old wounds surfaced. My fiancée stepped closer, her hand trembling as it hovered near mine. "Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me?" I pulled my hand back slightly. "Because you stopped trusting me long ago." Her eyes glistened, and for the first time, I saw fear replace superiority. The warm lighting now felt harsh, exposing every crack in the image they worked so hard to maintain. Conversations hushed across the restaurant as people watched this emotional unraveling unfold, like a spectacle that couldn't be unseen. I could feel every heartbeat, every breath, every unspoken word hovering between us, tense and fragile. And as I stared at the woman who once felt like home but now felt like a stranger, I realized the confrontation wasn't finished, it was only beginning to tear through everything we'd built, and the next choice I made could break us beyond repair. I'm a 29-year-old guy who stood there feeling the final thread of what we were slowly unravel in my hands, and instead of panic, a quiet clarity settled into my bones. The restaurant buzzed faintly with stunned whispers, the scent of coffee and tension lingering in the air, as her family stared at me like I was a villain instead of the man they broke. My fiancée stepped closer, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes, and for a split second I saw the girl I once loved, the one who made me believe I could belong. "Please," she whispered, voice trembling, "we can fix this, just say something." I inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of every insult, every dismissive laugh, every moment she chose their approval over my dignity. You called it protection, I said softly, but you let them strip me down piece by piece. Her silence screamed louder than any apology could. Her father scoffed bitterly, still trying to regain control, but his words felt hollow now, like echoes fading against stone walls that no longer feared his voice. I didn't do this to punish you, I continued, my voice steady but laced with sorrow. I did this because staying quiet was destroying me. The man who once bowed his head in shame now looked them straight in the eyes, not with vengeance, but with self-respect they never thought I'd grow into. The air felt heavier, but in my chest, something finally loosened. My fiancée shook her head, tears finally falling. You're really walking away? Yes, I replied gently. Because love without respect isn't love, it's survival. I turned toward the exit, every step echoing across polished floors that once made me feel small. The late afternoon sun poured through the glass doors, warm and real against my face, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe without shrinking. I wasn't walking away broken, I was walking forward rebuilt, reclaiming the dignity I let them steal. Behind me, voices rose, accusations, regrets, and sorrow blending into noise that no longer defined me. And as I stepped into the quiet outside world, leaving their illusion and their cruelty behind, I realized something powerful had taken root in the silence. This wasn't the end of my worth, it was the beginning of my freedom.